Hi guys, Geekonomics here again. So what I want to do today is just to talk to you a little bit about the transport paper, which is coming up on Friday, obviously, the F584 paper. It's a little bit more difficult to predict what the likely questions will be, but I'm going to have a little analysis of the June 14 paper, the June 13 paper, the June 2012 paper, and then see if there are at least some topic areas which are more likely to come up on the paper this Friday than others. So let's just start with that. So let's have a look first of all at the June 2014 paper. So the data response on that particular paper looked at cost-benefit analysis. It looked at public and private sector approaches to transport investment. It looked at and asked the candidates to define and explain what's meant by hypothecation. It considered the effectiveness of toll roads to reduce congestion, and then the final point on the data response question was the role of the private sector in road transport. First off, I must stress the need for you all to bring a calculator to this particular exam. Might sound obvious, but don't forget to bring a calculator. On every transport paper there is always data which you, the candidate, are expected to interpret. The essays on the 2014 paper were with regard to efficiency in monopolistic competition. Do make sure that you do not confuse monopolistic competition with monopoly, as one or two candidates of mine did last year, and to their cost. So make sure you read the question carefully. Is it monopoly or is it monopolistic competition? Second essay on that paper was with regard to the negative externalities which arise from transport. And the part B was to discuss the effectiveness of forecasting transport to meet future trends and needs. And then the final essay was with regard to barriers to entry in the UK transport market. And then the part B was, should the government consider raising passenger duty to increase the sustainability of transport? So quite a nice little paper actually, June 2013. Let's have a look now at the June 2013 data response questions. So things which were asked were the barriers to entry consideration, objectives of firms. Candidates again asked to interpret bar charts. They were asked to draw the subsidy diagram, and then the higher order questions at the end were: number one, discuss the extent to which local bus markets are oligopolies, and then to consider how a rise in competition would impact efficiency. In terms of the essays, one again on market failure, why is transport a form of market failure? And then the part B was to discuss the effectiveness of an indirect tax of solving that market failure. The second essay was to discuss the reasons for the growth in rail passenger numbers, and then discuss how rail privatisation in the UK has been implemented, whether or not it's been a success. And then the third essay was on sustainable air transport policy, and the part B being, should the government expand the road network in the UK? And then finally, if we just move along to June 2012, again, the data response questions to start off with. So consideration of a concentration ratio. You were asked to calculate, candidates were asked to calculate the 5-firm concentration ratio, FFCR. The impact on market concentration of a merger. Candidates asked to distinguish between fixed and variable costs, economies and diseconomies of scale, And then again, the heavyweight question on that one was with regard to deregulation in the transport market. And the three essays were: number one, how do we place a value on externalities to do with transport? Part B, a discussion question with regard to subsidising public transport. Second essay on monopolistic competition again, although the part B focused on the monopoly provision and whether or not that was beneficial to producers and consumers. And then thirdly, the final essay was to consider, number one, why transport is a derived demand, and then the part B, the problems of forecasting future trends in transport. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the previous three sessions, and generally speaking, what goes in the previous three sessions doesn't generally get repeated on the fourth. So the exam that you're going to do is more likely to be focusing on other areas. Now I'm just going to bring up a copy of the specification here, because when we are, just get to the start of it, when we are looking at, you'll remember when we looked at the global economy paper, it was very easy to determine what the question would be whenever we looked at the candidates should be able to section on the right hand side. So candidates should be able to do all of these things. Now the distinction between the left hand side of the spec and the right hand side of the spec on transport is really not particularly clear, and so it does make the actual prediction of exam questions much more difficult. Obviously things which start with define, understand, apply, interpret, those are the things which are going to form the start of your data response questions, and then anything further on which has, so when we get into these later sections, for example, anything further on which has things like discuss on them, they're obviously prime candidates to be your essay questions. So I think the first thing to do is to go through and just make sure that you know how to do all the describes, how to do all the explains, how to do the interpretation. And as I've already said, make sure that you bring a calculator with you to the exam. Make sure, I don't mean to insult your intelligence, you're 18 years of age, but do make sure you can calculate a percentage change, for example, from year 1 to year X. Make sure that you can calculate a percentage change. I know it sounds basic and elementary, but you'd be surprised the number of students, even at A2, potential economics undergraduates, can't even do the sort of the very basic analysis in that respect. So let's have a look then at what the likely topic areas might be on Friday's exam paper. But as I say, this is much more difficult to assess. I'd like to just talk about the essay questions first of all, if I may. And I'm just going to focus on these three things at the bottom to start off with. You'll have seen from the essays, which I've just gone through and explained, generally speaking, there's always one essay question on market failure, one essay question on market structure, and one essay question on either forecasting or sustainable transport policy. In my view, and it is only my view, I think these two are the easier, and therefore certainly I would be advising my candidates, my students, to be considering an essay on market failures and the remedies, obviously the regulation, the subsidy, the taxation. And market structure, I just love the market structure work: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, natural monopoly, oligopoly, contestable markets. Those are really the key market structures that you need to know about, and if you can know all the diagrams for those, you're on to a winner really straight away. The forecasting one has been up before. Some candidates do like that. I find there's nothing too tangible to hang your hat on, but if that's your type of thing, then by all means go for it. But I think it's safe to say that this session, if you prepare an answer with regard to market failure, you're bound to get an essay on it, and if you prepare an answer with regard to market structure, you're bound to get an answer on it. And probably same goes for forecasting and sustainable transport policy. In terms of the data question, here's a few things that I think it might be worth considering, which haven't appeared in previous sessions. So first of all, are you able to define transport in terms of transport operations and infrastructure? It's at the very start of your specification. Are you able to identify the advantages and disadvantages of the main modes of transport for passengers and freight? Do you understand the structure of transport operations in the UK? Now, particularly with regard to the railway industry, there was a tremendous programme on the BBC. I'm not sure if it's on iPlayer still, but it's certainly on YouTube. I've put a link to it on my Twitter feed, so if you go to Geekonomics on Twitter, you'll get the link to it. And if you watch that between now and Friday, you will have a tremendous knowledge, not only of the structure of the UK rail industry, but also all of the, not only advantages of the new setup, but also all of the disadvantages as well. Great evaluative comments that you could glean from that. So I recommend that you do have a look at that. Again, for the data question, you might get a question about short run and long run costs. Maybe you'll be asked to draw the short run cost curves of a firm and explain them, or the long run average cost curve and explain how it represents changing scale as you jump from one short run cost curve to another. Perhaps you'll be asked to consider firms' objectives in terms of revenues and other objectives that they may have in terms of sales maximization, profit satisficing, all that type of thing. You might get a question on economies and diseconomies of scale. I think the obvious area in terms of market structure, certainly for this session, has to be natural monopoly. We've had a question on monopoly and all the other market structures, but not really natural monopoly. So when I put together a video or two later in the week, certainly part of my analysis will focus on natural monopoly. You're going to need to know all the market structures and the efficiencies that go alongside them anyway, so do make sure that you can draw the diagrams: perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic, oligopoly. Do be aware that contestable markets, a substitute market for perfect competition. Know all of the efficiencies: P equals MC, P equals min ATC, allocative efficiency, productive efficiency, Pareto efficiency, etc. I know that you'll know all this at this stage anyway. Franchising hasn't been up before. Maybe that's an area to focus on. Privatization in the transport industry, again, little bits and pieces on that, but not a great deal. Market failure in all its forms is certainly going to be on there. We've had questions which have asked you to consider tax and subsidy. The issue of regulation hasn't been on before, so maybe that's an area to look at. Sustainable transport policy, always certainly potential for an essay question, and then the whole issue of road pricing. Again, likely to come up, I think, certainly more likely than it has been in previous sessions. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're thinking about at the moment. In the next day or two, I'll be adding 1 or 2 videos, particularly with regard to market structures and market failures, and obviously I'm saying natural monopoly is a potential area to be considering, so watch out for that as well. So that's my sort of early thoughts on this. I'll bring you another video or two later in the week. If there's anything else that I think of that might be useful to you, then I'll tweet that out, and you can find that on my Geekonomics Twitter. and good luck with the revision. Any questions, obviously I do my best to answer your questions, so do send me a question, I'll fire you an answer back as soon as I get a chance. Okay, so good luck with it.